like 5 things that will go wrong. But anyway, okay, Lesley, welcome to Venture with Grace. We're live.
Great to be here.
I'm sorry. I just literally gave you my entire makeup routine under
That
25
was
seconds.
kind of fun.
Oh man. Okay, so I want to start with, I feel like in on the like maybe we start with like, I feel like in a different podcast you talk a lot about like your experiences working with Aaron Levy and at
Oh yeah.
Box. Maybe we could start with like, what do you feel like are defining moment of your career that that kind of shape you into who you are today?
Defining moment. Well, there's been many, and I would say I could probably call on one from Informatica, where everybody thought I was crazy that I was taking an SDR management job from being a strategic account rep prior. It was one of the best decisions of my life from a career perspective because of the manager that I was working for. He gave me huge amounts of opportunity to sort of identify opportunities within the business to create efficiency or enable resources to do work better. And he just said, go for it, pretty much. And that was, that autonomy really helped me build an 8-year run there, where I did SDR, then did inside sales, then built a mid-market team, then helped them build out their first e-commerce. One of the first things I did was I said to him, look, you've got sales reps spending their time putting deals in a system. That is a big waste of their time. And so I gave him a business plan, hire 3 people. That time it's right now being used by your AEs. And he just said, okay, go do it. So, in that situation, you hire people who know what they're doing. I hired somebody called John Luke. He completely knew how to run sales ops and killed it. And it just kind of progressed that way, looking for opportunities in the organization. Best moment so that was Informatica. Best moment at MySQL was actually not a great moment. It was a moment where I learned that, that it's more important to be authentic than paranoid. Because I had a group of people who said, Lesley, you're being way too directive in your coaching of us and how we do what we do. And I really had to think about what matters. It's not doing it my way, which is I've said on other podcasts. It's really a big learning when you learn that's not doing it your way. And recognizing, probably segment last one is that when you hire people that are better than you are at something, you just it really accelerates your ability to grow the whole organization. What I mean by that is I had these unbelievable second line and first line managers who could narrate the story for the future for their teams better than I have ever seen. And the way they could inspire their teams was phenomenal. Jeff and Luke, they just created this sense of belonging and culture inside of each one of their groups. And when you have, if you think about it, 5 sales teams who all are charging towards a North Star that is the culture of their group. So like for the West Coast, it was one thing. For the East Coast, it was another. For the Central, it was another. And it was all because the leaders in those groups were phenomenal at building a sense of belonging, connecting what each individual is doing to the bigger picture, which is something I learned to do better from them. And I think that's a really big transition, is when you realize that if you can hire people that are better and have superpowers that you don't have, it only makes the whole better.
Yeah, totally. I mean, speaking of hiring people that are better, so I wonder, first of all, like if you are, I mean, I think like number one is like recognizing the talent that the other person could have. And then the other thing is like, how do you hire someone that could just like be better than you in a category when it's like maybe a category that you may not as good as like the other person's.
How do you do that?
Yeah. So basically, yeah. How do you hire people that are better?
I kind of know what my weaknesses are and what my strengths are. And I think there's a set of skills that you look for, but to be very practical about it, you have to have a framework for how you hire. And there's a book called Who, and it goes through a very in-depth framework about how you hire. And then also, if you're interested in understanding kind of ways that you do that, but what you're trying to find out is what are the intrinsic motivators of this person? And do they share the same characteristics right? And principles that you have. So characteristics would be like grit, right? Like, tell me a story about where you overcame an obstacle or were in a situation you've never been in and how you got out of it. And I do that because when I was in college, my car, my car was moved off the street because I left it there too long. And my roommate was like, "What are you going to do about it?" I'm like, "Well, I don't have any money to pay for it." And she's like, "Well, your car's gone." I'm like, "Yeah, I can walk." And I said, "And it's locked up somewhere where it's safe, and I'll go get it when I can." And that's sort of like street smart. So going back to your question, you look for things like that. That's a grit thing. Like, can they tell you a story about how they got themselves out of a situation? And then I look for people who are very self-aware. That's the classic tell me when you failed kind of story. But what I'm trying to do in building that out leadership team is looking for the skills that I don't have to fill out, because the uniquenesses that exist in all of us are actually what makes the whole better. And I want people in my leadership team that will, one, be better at those things because they'll make me stronger. Second, have a point of view about how they operate and what they do and how they'll execute. So that's another one, is can they tell you a clear path? Because their point of view is going to be as important as mine, and the best teams are able to bring all those points of view together to create an operational machine that works. And give you an example is, competency, like how do we do what we do and how do we skill up people? That was a really important thing at Segment. It was very important at Box too, but in a different way. In Segment, it was very much about skill and competency and making sure that people could understand where they were on a continuum. And it was very important to Jeff Bose, who worked for me, to make sure that was really clear to people, so that when we went into reviews, that they would know, okay, I've been moving through this path. Mm-hmm. I know that if I want to move up in the organization, I need to do these things. I mean, he's phenomenal at putting those kinds of things together. So let him put those things together. That's something that he now carries forward in his career. So hopefully that answers the question.
Totally. So like basically having like a clear path for people to kind of succeed in our organization. What are people typically drive by? Because I feel like it's really hard to actually read people, and like unless you understand what's their whole picture. And then a lot of people really focus on like the financial incentives, but obviously I feel like that's like a really important thing. But or what if there's a conflict? Let's say the person was like, "Hey, I really want to be the VP of sales," and like, or like, "I want your job," or like, how do you kind of like motivate people when they're asking you like questions that are like may not be easy?
That's a really good one, Grace. I want to be the VP of sales, and you are. I mean, or why are you here? In the case of this fractional CRO example, like, why are you here? This was very fair question. Like, why are you here? Like, there was a global VP of sales there. He's like, and, I said, look, my job is not to take your job. My job is to make you so good that the CFO says, if this person says something, I can trust it and I can take that to the market. Like, that's something we need to work on. And my job is to make you better at that, as an example, right? To answer the question about, like, yes, you should want my job, and I should be developing you such that you can have my job. And if I'm not, then then you should ask yourself why you're here. And that goes back to what I was saying a couple of minutes ago, related to the manager you work for and the autonomy they give you. And I talked about the Informatica situation. That could have just been a sales development manager role. I went to him, a couple months later and said, "I'm completely bored. These are 3 things I can do." And this is a moment, Grace. Like, okay, did he say, "I want you to go pursue those 3 things"? Or he said, "No, I want you to stay in your lane"? He didn't. He said, "Okay, go do it. Give me a business justification for why, and then I'll give you the opportunity to do it." And he did that literally 5 or 6 more times. I even came back to him during a pretty tough time in the business, and I said, "Hey, I think there's an opportunity with renewals." And at that time, it was perpetual software, so it wasn't SaaS. And he said, "I don't want you to spend your time doing that." And I said, I'm going to do it anyway, because I think it's a huge business opportunity. So I took one person who was in inside sales, and I said, we're going to go try to figure this out, and I'm going to give you a quarter, and we're going to see how much revenue we can come up with. Quarter later, like, it was compelling enough that we actually ended up building out a team. But But what is important about what I'm saying there is that's the culture of the company and how your leader is thinking about your career. And that's the
Mhm.
question you need to ask. And when you're thinking about joining a business is, am I going to be in a situation where I can take risks and grow? And will my boss have my back? And going back to the original question, the best things that can happen to me is when somebody takes my job. That should mean that I've moved on to another job, right? So that's a good thing.
For sure. Okay, maybe we start with like your most recent job since you have been, the most recent like job is like you're the CRO of Gem and then
Mhm,
now you're fractional CRO of Vimeo and Sourcegraph.
mhm.
Maybe we could start with like, what is fractional CRO and then what is the role? Obviously, you already unpacked a little bit through the answer of the last question, but like I wonder like how do you define fractional CRO and how do you kind of like create KPI for yourself and how do you
Yeah.
work with
Oh, yeah. Really good question.
yeah.
Especially the last part of it, because that was a difficult
Mhm,
part. So the sort of initially with the Vimeo one, it was
mhm,
to help the CEO who'd come off the board
mhm,
and come in to be president, help him understand and assess the current state of the go-to-market
mhm,
team while he was figuring out the other part of the business. So
mhm,
he asked me to come in and just do an assessment, and that, theoretically, that would have taken a
mhm,
month. And I think in that situation, you better have sort of a framing for how you do
mhm,
that assessment. And that, thankfully, I had because I had learned all those things and how I operate, what a CRO needs to do, which is you really have to, as a CRO, you have to telescope, wide angle lens, microscope the
mhm,
business, which means like the telescope is what's happening in the future, what's the strategy. The wide angle lens is kind of understand across a number of business parts what's going on. And then the microscope is what is actually happening KPIs wise, to your point, like what is actually happening in the jobs to be done and the work that's being done. Um, and in order to do that, I had to think through like, how would I do that? Well, for me, it's like, okay, what's the people situation?
mhm,
What are the processes that are in play? How is their pipeline development? Because pipeline is the leading indicator of what's going to happen next in the business. Um, Tell them like what is their rigor? And when I say rigor, I mean what's the cadence of how they operate on a week to week basis? How do they
mhm,
hold their managers accountable? How do they hold their AEs accountable? And then it was like, okay, what's the revenue trajectory? Where is it good? Where is it bad? Where are there gaps? And then finally, um, are their customers happy? Like, do they talk about their customers? Do they
mhm,
understand that they are here to serve the customer? So that's really people, process, pipeline. Um,
mhm,
it's all about rigor, which I talked about through that whole thing. Revenue and retention. That's like my 3 Ps and my 3 Rs
mhm,
framework that I use for this. So I went through that
mhm,
framework, figure out what were the critical things we needed to do, wrote an assessment, made a recommendation. These are the top three. The top one was around the managing the business flow, the sales process was we don't have rigor. So we implemented MedPick. That
mhm,
was one of the things I did. So that was kind of going from high, like the big picture of the
mhm,
telescoping in all the way down to the microscope. We're going to go run an
mhm,
enablement program. And then the other one was pipeline. They didn't have any kind of pipeline motion rigor around the pipeline. So, and they didn't have kind of a framing for how do I operate a pipeline process on a regular basis that holds everybody accountable. So in that one, it was literally teach them, and everybody who saw John McMahon earlier this week will appreciate this. I did a Pipeline Tuesday situation, which was,
mhm,
this is what everybody's responsible for. This is what we're going to focus on this week. This is the theme. This is the context of this is the persona we're talking to. Here's the context. Here's your value prop. And then kind of what are all the steps after that? And we built out for the next 6 months a pipeline process and then
mhm,
tracked everybody on it. Nobody had been tracked on it. So those are two examples of very tactical things I did in the business. The last one I'll talk about is the people. What I talked about at first was coming into an organization as this person who isn't the new CRO, you're this fractional person. You really have to build trust of those people who are going to be your partners in the business. In this case, it was the VP of sales, the person running RevOps, the CEO, obviously. And in the midst of my doing this, they hired a new CEO. So I had to build his trust up in the middle of the process. And you do that by helping them understand why you're there and what your intentions are. And I was very clear about this with Josh, who was the VP of sales. It was like, Josh, what I told you before, we need to help the CFO and the executive team understand exactly what's happening in your business. Like, open the kimono. Do not be afraid of that, because the more they know, the more you can make them a part of your success. And it worked. I mean, it went really well. The RevOps team, it's like, Lesley doesn't operate the business. How is she going to go run a pipeline process through our business? Again, it was building their trust by walking them through my recommended process, blending that with their process, and then getting aligned with frontline managers in the business. Like, that's really important, and telling them why I was there for there. So the interesting thing about being a fractional CRO at Vimeo, public company, was I had to kind of go into the business and become part of the business and build trust across the business. So it was very much of an up, down, and across situation, all the way down to AEs in the business.
I wonder, I want to say, like, so for example, let's say you're the fractional CRO of two different company. Can you talk about, like, okay, maybe this is like TMI, but like, what does like the comps kind of look like? So like, does this equivalent to like I hire like a part-time CRO for my business, or like how does that? I'm sure like there are founders that are listening, trying to maybe work with you, or you know, having a CRO or fractional CRO. Like, I mean,
Yeah.
how do
Okay.
you?
Yeah.
Maybe we don't have to go through the exact stuff, but I'm just
No.
saying, like, how do you think about this, and then how do you measure the ROI since they already have a CRO? Like, do we just say, hey, like we accelerate the revenue by XYZ, or like how do you kind of measure? What's your kind of like input into
No,
it?
it's a good question. The metrics and the how do you assess the what and the how, and did the person deliver impact? Good question. Well, I think in those two situations, it was very clear, because what it meant in the situation where we did MedPEC, the metric was, did we improve on our pipeline conversion to revenue? And we did. It went really well, and is continuing. I mean, it's now become part of the fabric of the business that they kind of talk this way about all their deal reviews. It's getting better and better, and it will continue to do so. On the pipeline one, were we building more pipeline than we were before? Like, those are very clear ones. Did we go in saying we want to accelerate pipeline by 20%? No. What we wanted to do was say, we want to come out of this exercise with a pipeline council, where we have a cross-functional team that is very clear on where we are with pipeline and who is delivering the pipeline. So that was one of the goals. The second one was, they didn't really have a framework for how pipeline should be delivered. So, which means that they couldn't hold anybody accountable. So the next step was, how do we create the accountability for each one of those by giving them goals and making sure that we're connecting on a week-to-week basis and tracking how that's going? So the second was measure was, does everybody have accountability, and do they know what their number is? So establishing that. And then the third, obviously, much like the first one with MedPIC, was, what are we seeing an uplift in revenue as a result of these two things? And that, by the way, Grace, takes 6 to 9 months. So that's why you want to think of some of those smaller things, like, do we have a pipeline council? Does everybody know their numbers? Are we executing Pipeline Tuesdays on a repeat basis? Do we have all of the plans for those? So those are more tactical. And then the bigger one is obviously revenue. I'm going to flip really quickly to the Sourcegraph situation, which is very different. That situation is very much of, they have three strong leaders in the business that are growing their skill set. So think of them as they want to be the next CRO, right? Or they want to be the next general manager, whatever. But they have a set of skills that they need to build stronger competencies on. And so my job really there is to watch how they're operating and provide, hey, you might want to think about putting this framework in. You might want to think about putting this framework in, or here's what I've seen before in this situation. So it's a much more of a coaching situation, and maybe what I would call more of, an advisor role for them. There are some things that I can help accelerate. So for them, it's very much, can you accelerate the development of these people? can we create a cohesive go-to-market motion where those people are working together? That was one of the objectives for the CEO. And can we create a better way of talking in the executive team about the go-to-market piece? And so that's those things. And the measure on that is checking in with the CEO and asking the question, are you seeing improvements in that? And you can, weirdly enough, while it's not a KPI, you can see it in just the way the team is behaving together. And, you know, what I will always push because of my operational orientation is, do you have a repeatable operation that you're working through? Have you narrowed down the 3 things that you need to do now, and how are we progressing to those? And I think sometimes when you're running fast in a startup, getting back to, are we progressing on the fundamentals of making this repeatable? And I talk a lot about, you know, being go-to-market ready. Is you get product market fit. The next one is, do you have go-to-market fit? And go-to-market fit is, can you repeat this and get more of a flywheel going versus having, which you have to when you get in product market, but versus having a bunch of snowflakes, right? Which is basically like, okay, I have these snowflakes. What are the common things that are in those snowflakes? What are the foundational pieces of our capability that all of our customers are using? And that's what you use to get to that next part, which is, that's what we're going to train the go-to-market team on. And they're going to know that, like, so that they can repeat it. That's what creates the velocity. And I think that's sometimes the hardest thing when you're a founder, is to figure out, okay, I've done this great thing. I've got product market fit. But in some cases, you're flying all over the country, serving the customer in a way that is not repeatable. And, you know, one of the things I heard was, if you can't repeat it, don't do it. Like, that was sort of one of the foundational things I heard when I was at Meta, from one of the leaders there, because it costs the company a lot of money. So I guess the comment, going back to like, how do you measure that, is, you know, what are the leading indicators of retention for your customers? So do you know, like, the things that indicate usage and that this product has been embedded into the organization, such that when, I'm just going to use my example, like the director of engineering is asked by the CFO when he goes to renew this, like, why the hell are we renewing this? They have a defensible reason for why they're renewing it. It has reduced the time our developers spend checking code by 30%. It has increased our ability to innovate. They're doing 20% more innovation. I'm just using some examples, but that goes back to all the way back to your question about, how do you measure the impact of a fractional CRO?
Wow, I love that. And I feel like, okay, so I feel like, I mean, I definitely took a lot of notes. We'll circle back about, like, I feel like one thing you mentioned at the very beginning of the answer was like telescope, wide angle, and microscope. We'll come back to that because I want to just go through the 3P and 3R again. So I want to, here's an exercise, right? So I feel like you talk a lot about like the bigger scale companies. Maybe we could start talking about, like, you know, the smaller companies. So for example, let's say if I have like you've just me and a co-founder, or just myself, let's say I'm starting a company today, how do you think about people, process, and pipeline? So like, how do I build something from scratch? Let's say the people talent is yourself, and
So
the process.
how do you tailor the 3Ps and the 3Rs for founders and VCs?
Yeah, correct.
Maybe for founders, not VCs necessarily, but
Exactly.
we'll
go to the VC thing a little later. Yeah.
All right. So let's take people. You know, the characteristics of somebody who comes into a startup, you know, being one of those first salespeople, is very different than somebody who comes in, let's say, when you've got 50 million in revenue. So what I would say is, founders should really focus on hiring entrepreneurial sales leaders who can thrive in ambiguity. And the mistake a lot of first-time founders will make is they'll go hire the best enterprise salesperson. One thing to realize, oftentimes that enterprise salesperson is really good because they have an army of people supporting their execution, which they should, because they're like the CEO of their book of business, and they know how to operate in a big organization. So test for the fact, are they going to be able to operate in ambiguity? Can they roll up their sleeves and do the work themselves? Can they, much like the founders do, can they, in front of a customer, articulate the art of the possible? And can they then bring that back into the organization in a succinct way and say, hey, if it's a product team, these are the things that we must have in this to be successful, right? So sorry about that.
No worries.
So that I would say that is one of the things. And then there's a great blog post that I talked to you about for entrepreneurs only that was done by David Skock. And I got connected to David very early on in my career. And he very much walks through like, here's how you get the first one. And then when you get that, here are all the indicators you should look for the second one. And when I mean second one, I mean second hire for sales, et cetera. So it's a really good framework that you can lean back on. And I'm a big believer in having frameworks you can lean on. They're kind of like security blankets. You could say, okay, am I meeting, most of this criteria? Then let's go hire the next one. And in that case, what you're looking for is, to hire next one is you're looking for demand. Like, is that first salesperson drowning? Are they able to successfully execute a sales process and win the deals? So hopefully that answers your question about like who you bring in initially. Biggest things are thriving in ambiguity, ability to get their arms in and do the work to get the deal through the entire process. Their ability to paint a vision for the customer that is in line with the vision that the CEO has. And, like I'm kind of painting a picture of a unicorn by adding this, but do they have the ability to create an repeatable operation? And they should in their own plan the question is, can they expand that over time?
Sorry. While you were talking, I had another question okay, let's say, if I'm creating a new product in my business line and this new product have really low profit margin. I know it's not the chief's, it's not the CRO's problem at this point, but anyway, so basically you have not increase the price yet. So like, let's say you launch a new product, you kind of want to go to market, so you kind of selling it cheaply, so you're just covering the cost and stuff like that. How do you start adding profit to it, meaning like increasing the price, and then the existing client will be like, wow, you charged me X dollar last time, why do you charge me Y dollar this time? How do you kind of like create these kind of tailored things? And then, for example, if you're selling let's say let's say you're selling to one group of customer, now you're trying to expanding, and then each type of customer are buying for different reasons. How do you kind of like create repeatable sales cycle for yourself?
Okay, so there's lots of questions in there. So I think I'll take the first one, which was the margin.
No margin.
The margin's very low. You're in a situation where, let's just say you're coming up on a renewal, and you've served the customer. You feel confident that when you get that you can articulate, and this is a really important thing, you can articulate the value delivered to the business. If you can't talk about the value delivered, and I mean defensible value, which is quantifiable value, like how have we reduced the resource cost potentially? How have we increased revenue, or how have we reduced risk? Those are some things, right, to think about. And you have to actually be able to speak to that, because any CFO worth their salt will say, like, why would I do this again if you can't prove to me what you accomplished last year? And this is actually the big question about AI in this year, right? Like, what did we do with it? To talk about, now you are going to increase, right? So one of the things that you need to do, going back to what I said, is about what are the foundational capabilities the product has, is you have to be able to articulate the ones that are now foundational, that are like durable, product tested, right? That worked. Because theoretically, the reason they chose you, which a lot of companies do that, is because they are taking on the risk when they first do it. You're a young company, you're not proven, et cetera, but you've just proven yourself. So you have the right to ask. The other thing that is interesting in what happens in companies like this is a person who came in as the first seller is oftentimes the most resistant to doing this because they're so uncomfortable with it. Whereas you bring a brand new person in, they'll do it. So why do I tell you that? Is because you have to frame up a pricing and package. You have to have pricing and packaging, and you have to have like how do we move from self-serve product-led growth into an enterprise package, or, the stair-step approach into that. You have to have that framed up, because if you don't, you leave the person who is responsible for selling it without a lot of framing and justification for moving into that next price range.
Mm-hmm.
And that pricing and packaging obviously has like all of the capabilities that you're providing. It doesn't need to be fully fleshed out, like, because you're still early, but you're able to say, we were here when we started, Mr. Customer, a year ago. One of the things you were doing, and we appreciate your partnership, is you were taking some risk on a young company. We're now here 12 months later, and we've proven that these things work in your business. In fact, this is what you've been able to do with us. As not as a result, but in this year, we've also done that. We've proven that with X number of customers, and we've added these capabilities to the product that you've been taking advantage of for how many months. So next year's cost is going to be Y. That's much better than saying we increase prices. Right?
Next year is Y. Okay, I'm taking notes.
Why, instead of in the context of it's moved up, you have these pieces of capability you didn't have a year ago. Those pieces of capability are delivering this value to you. We want to continue to do that. And by the way, and next year we're going to do this. Which is why you really, what I said about when you think about joining a company is like the vision of the founder is so important, and how they articulate that vision over a horizon of 3 years. And when I say this, I don't mean you have to have all the details of it. You just have to be able to paint like the art of the possible of where we're going and why that's important, and what the impact of that will be to this customer's business. And what you're doing there is saying, we are partners in this, and our job is to make sure we deliver on this promise. And this year we've done it. We've actually built our product more. We have a pricing and packaging piece. These are all the pieces you can choose. You can choose not to do that, but you will lose this. And that's the last thing I'll say on this, Grace, is everybody should know what happens if they don't use your product. What will happen in business if you take the product out?
I have so many questions here. Like, I think you put in like such a great framework. And then okay, so I have like 4 things that I thought about during our conversation. One thing is, what if they're selling like a really long-term product that like you don't really see immediate result? Let's say it's kind of like, in the venture capital space, like people raising a fund, that's kind of, you don't really see the result after 10 years. Like, how am I going to create the FOMO to be like, hey, here's our result? And then number 2 is like, how do you even know the result? Let's say the customers don't report to you. So after, let's say they buy this product, and then you can check in with them to be like, hey, how do you like using it? Or like, let's say you're selling a service, like, and then if people come back to you, obviously they probably gain some value, but they may not tell you the full picture because they're maybe trying to cut down the price too. They're like, oh yeah, it's kind of whatever, but like maybe we'll buy again or whatever. So like, how do you think about like, how do you kind of actually track down the result after people buy? And then okay, I'll stop there. I still have 2 more,
Grace,
but I'm
this,
like,
again, this goes to the defensible value thing I was talking about. It is our job to understand if we're serving the customer, and that starts the day after they buy. Like, if we're going to deliver a product to them, our job is to make sure that it gets incorporated in their business and that it works. The mistake a lot of startups make, and this is what you've seen, what you see when you start to see these retention challenges, the churn issues, is they don't spend time understanding if the product capabilities, right, are being embedded into the business such that they're on the way. They may not, it might take 12 months on the way to delivering the outcome. So very large companies, you're absolutely right. There's a lot of bureaucracy. There's a lot of steps they need to take, but our job is to make sure that we have the person who has the influence and power to do that. So again, I'll go back to John McMahon, where he talks about, do you have a champion who has a personal interest in getting this to happen? And it is, when I say personal, it will further their career by making sure that this happens. So they're vested in making it happen. Second is, do you have the connection to the economic buyer where you told them what the value will be, if they move by taking your product, move from the current state they're in to the future state, and what the business outcomes, the positive business outcomes they achieve. I'm almost verbatim repeating what he probably has said a million times, but I say that because what happens in a lot of companies is they sell the product, and then the customer success team is responsible for making sure the capabilities work. Like the ability to test your code, works. But is it getting across all of the engineers? That's our job. That's our job to make sure. Like that is why you have QBRs with the customer.
Mm-hmm.
And the QBR of the customer isn't about, does it operationally do what it says it's going to do? It's how is it changing the way you're doing the jobs to be done? And is that better? And I'll take Gem as an example. One of the greatest things that Gem does, it allows you to actually understand your talent funnel and where the people you're trying to bring into the business, your talent, the people you're trying to hire, sit in that funnel. In other words, have they gone through interview number 1? Did they make it past that? Are they going to a panel interview? How many of the people get to the panel interview? One of the things that your customer success person should be talking about is, how has that funnel changed? Right? Is it better? Where can you see where you have blockers? That's a business discussion, right? Versus, are you able to upload a resume? Like that's a feature. So what I'm saying here is, sometimes what happens is we get so focused, the CSM team gets so focused on making sure that the features work, they lose sight of, are those features delivering on the promise that we said to the customer? And in the QBRs, you should be talking about the promise. You certainly should have time set aside for do we have bugs in the product? Of course. But the value of a CSM is making sure that we're serving the business objectives with the product, that the capabilities are enabling the business outcome. Hard to do. I mean, I can tell you, like, there's so many places where, and this is not the fault of the CSM. It's what naturally happens when somebody is in a situation where they're bringing in a new product and it doesn't work. And they're like, oh my God, I'm stuck. I got to get this fixed. So it becomes a conversation. It becomes a relationship of fix this for me. Like they ask, you fix, and you think you're serving them by doing that. You're not. If you don't then ladder those up to say, what are all of those serving? What are they delivering? And so it's a long way of saying this is a multifunctional job, which is, it's a job of the CSM, to actually make sure that the kind of like a COO, the trains are operating on time, that the features are working as advertised. In my mind, it's the job of the AE, with understanding where the CSM is, to make sure that we're delivering on the promise, because they're the ones who sold it in the first place, right? So it's those two should come together on a quarterly basis to determine, what are we going to say in this next QBR with the customer? What are the things we need to know in order to prove that we are delivering on the value and on the promise that we said we would, that might come up, 6 months from now. If you do that in the 9th month of a 1-year contract, it's too late. So that needs to happen earlier. It needs to be very thoughtful. One of the SE leader at Segment called this the balanced account team. And the balanced account team is essentially, if you think about how we serve the customer, it's the AE serves the customer as the CEO of that customer's relationship with us. In other words, the overarching, how are we operating with this customer? Are we delivering on the promise on a number of different fronts, making sure they know what the CSM's progressing? Do we have a person who's actually running the project and getting through the project? The CSM as the COO operator, like, are the operational pieces working the way they're supposed to? And then the systems, there's a number of names for this. I'll call it SE. I'll call it sales engineer. I'm sorry if people don't find that. It's the engineer who's responsible for making sure that the capabilities, like integrations with other products, happen, or if there's a technical opportunity to increase the capabilities we can deliver. That person's like the CTO of the account. Those people together should have a real clear sense of how we're serving the customer, and are we does the product features and functions work, and is that delivering the business outcome that they want?
I really like that you really break it down into very detailed plan, like, quarterly basis, 9th month, like when do you hire XYZ? And I wonder, so like, how do you, I guess, like, if, like, I guess, like, you mentioned a few things about, like, uh, increasing price next year. So I'm just looking at the notes that we were chatting about earlier. So like,
Mhm.
I guess, like, you mentioned about, like, instead of telling people, hey, like, we're increasing price, but you say next year the value, the price is gonna be Y. And how do you, I guess, like, if you, and then also if you take the product out, like, how do you measure the impact and stuff like
Yeah.
that?
Yeah.
Um, I guess, how do you, like, walk people through that conversation? And, like, also, like, how do you pricing something? Just because I feel like sometimes you're selling a SaaS product that's already priced, but, like, there's, like, the, um, service side of things. A lot of people are selling, let's say, a product and service at the same time.
Yeah.
And how do you sell a service add-on or something, I guess, like, um, or I guess, just, like, also, how do you bring it up to be like, "Oh, next year is Y," and then, like,
Yeah.
in human
Yeah.
conversation that people are like, "Oh, you just doubled the price, like, yesterday," and, like, um
Yeah. So this is kind of the challenge we faced at Segment when I joined. Segment had 3 products they were selling, and I'm going to forget the name of one of them. So forgive me. But the more important thing is that there were 3 products, and the sales team would sell these 3 products together. One was a data pipeline product, and one was very much oriented towards delivering information about who your personas are and how you should market to them.
Mhm,
Really different value propositions.
mhm,
It became pretty clear that once the salesperson sold it and sent it over to the account manager, that it was hard to bring those pieces together because you're kind of across 2 parts of the organization, the engineering team and the marketing team. And the marketing team's not necessarily kind of in the details on how technology works. And the engineering team is like, once I have the pipelines going, I'm good. So it's like this
mhm,
conundrum of how do we actually deliver again on the promise, which is an
mhm,
integrated data persona delivery to view of customer. We now have a 360-degree view of the customer that we didn't have before because we're able to integrate all of these different data sources. Um, it was kind of a mess, candidly. Like, we had to fix
mhm,
that. So Steve DeVito is the person who came in there, and by like just sheer force of will, and making all of us understand the customer stories that were the outcome of doing this right,
mhm,
and being able to bring those back into the customer early in the process. So, Mr. Customer, what we've found with companies that are
mhm,
trying to do what you're doing is the outcome is you want to know your 5 personas and how to market to them. In order to
mhm,
do that, we need to bring all of these sources together, and there's going to be some integration capabilities that we need to do. In order to do that, you need some people in your organization, or we can augment that. What we have found is you are on, oftentimes our customers are moving on to the next project, as soon as we sign the contract. And we don't like we are here to be your partner, and we want to make sure this
mhm,
is executed. So I'm going to talk to you about consulting early, because it is the wrapper that makes this all work.
mhm,
And the time that we spend doing it is going to be less than the time that you try to get up and running on it, like in many cases. And again, this is very much who you're talking to. So if you're talking to a Fortune 500 company, it's very different than talking to a startup.
mhm,
Oftentimes, like your early adopters, they're going to go, no, thanks, I got it. Right. So
mhm,
understand who your audience is. Right. That's a
mhm,
really big part of this. I would not try to do that situation to a startup who understands fundamentally how do you integrate it. And oh, by the way, is very limited on resources. But when you're getting to the Nikes of the world, those companies are all about business outcomes. So in order to guarantee or
mhm,
make sure you're going to have that business outcome, you have to get their buy-in. And if you get resistance from that, like the consulting part of it early on, that is a sign that they're not really committed to actually doing something and putting the resources against this to get the outcomes. Now, again, when you do it, you can't just land it on top of the price, on top of the license pricing. They have to make sense together. Like, we do fast starts. The fast start does these 5 things. By the end of that fast start, you'll have these components running. Now, this maybe feel overwhelming to a CEO right now because that feels like a lot. It's like, think of it as inch by inch, yard by yard, mile by mile. That's how you want to think about these things. It's like, don't try to build out this wonderful consulting package right now. Build out what are the most important things to get the core capabilities of your product working. Like, what are the things that every customer has to do that? Start that as your consulting package. And then think about, okay, what's the next use case? How are we going to activate that use case? Is that helpful?
So interesting. Yeah, totally. Speaking of consulting package, I think like being I guess like when you're actually selling actual consulting services, how do you really like? I feel like here's the thing. So like lately, a lot of people have been coming to me for marketing stuff. So I've been consulting people on marketing or consulting startups or VC firms on marketing stuff. I think the problem is like each person or like each company is like facing something completely different.
Yeah.
It's really hard for me to be like, okay, here's my program, like let's talk about X, Y, and Z. And like though like X, Y, and Z would be useful, but like you kind of want people to see the result early and then they actually think you're valuable. On the other hand, it's like, how do you like, if you just come and then be like answering questions, and then people may not think you have a structure. And then if you have a structure, they may not really see the result, because actually a lot of people, I feel like in consulting, a lot of people just like, they're just lack of motivation to actually execute on a particular plan, or like they're challenged by a certain specific thing. So I feel like if you just solve problem, it may be easier, but on the other hand, people want to feel like right?
Yeah, Grace. Yeah. So I think what I'm hearing you ask is, how do you do it in such a way that they then own it when you're done?
Yeah, basically.
And I think a lot of, and I think also what you surface there is sometimes it's a situation where they don't know what they don't know. And so, when you, in the doing, at least this is what I found in the fractional piece, in the doing of it, there's value in providing a framework. In other words, I'm not going to tell you to do it this way, but here's something to look at and react to. This may be very different in your business. Let me walk you through how, we've done it in other things, right? Or we've done it against these 5 customers. This is exactly the same thing, by the way, that you do when you sell the software, which is, here's how we do it. This is why it's different or better. And this is where we've done it before. And this is the outcome that is achieved. Like literally that is exactly what we do when we sell, right? It's like, we have capabilities, they're differentiated by this. You're doing the same thing. I have these capabilities, they're differentiated by this. In your specific situation, you're telling me that you need these 3 capabilities. In order to deliver on these three capabilities, I'm going to need to put a framework in place that your team is going to need to learn in order to do it next year and keep doing it, right? Do you have somebody that will be the person who is taking this on inside your organization? Like, they need to carry it forward. And in the case of Vimeo, I had this great person I worked with that did that. She was great at just taking it, and every single time she made it hers. So like, that's the best case situation. And if you're not seeing that, you have to say something, right? So just recently I was at a fractional kind of get together, and this woman just like, it was brilliant. It was kind of an aha moment for me. She said, look, you kind of don't know what you don't know when you're getting together with the CEO and you're kind of feeling each other out. So the best thing to do is do an hourly for the first month, have a kind of broad objective that you're going for, and then check in week on week, progress report. And then at the end of that first month, move to a different kind of contract, which is more time, whatever you want to do, that is less hour to hour and has more outcomes associated with it, right? Why that's important is because in the beginning, you're trying to understand what the real problems that the problems to be solved are, and which ones are the most critical to solve. And our job is to get to the most critical ones. It's not to solve the 15th one. And sometimes it's hard for a CEO with all of the demands coming at them to get through like all of that to say, okay, this is the most important one. And that's our job. I mean, in my opinion, that's like the fun part of the job, is uncovering, what is the real breakthrough thing that you need to do.
I love that. Okay, so I have like 2 major subject topics that I prepared. So one is about AI. So I feel like you've been thinking a lot about AI. Maybe we could share a little bit more about like, in sales process, like what can be replaced by AI, what not, and what's the future of sales look like after leveraging AI?
Yeah. So I am pretty opinionated about this. One of the reasons that I decided not to kind of go back in is because I really wanted to learn about the application of AI in businesses, whether it's, across business and different business functions. Sales obviously being the one I know most. So here's the thing. We've been driven by the product managers of the applications that we use, like how we use a CRM, which is not the way, necessarily an AE would use it. A lot of that is because we need to capture the data so that we can understand where we are. It's not built for the AE, who is at the, if you think about it, companies, in my mind, do two things. They build and sell. And in selling, the AEs are at the center, atomic contributors to the business value. That was actually taken from Jeff Bose, who's really good at articulating. He said it to me. I'm like, absolutely. Those people, and this could be against it could be an engineer in the same way, right? If you're an AE, you're forced into using a CRM that tells you how to do your business a certain way. Well, this is a non-linear process. So what's really cool about agents is that the interface should, and what I hope for this is that it should enable the AE who has a book of business that they're driving to drive that book of business in the way that they want to drive it by asking a series of questions and getting answers. So let's drill down on what that means. So first, think about it in the context of transforming how we qualify and prioritize opportunities. So at Segment, we developed a lead scoring system, right? AI is taking that to the next level by analyzing vast amounts of data that are inside our organization and outside the organization, then bringing it together and hopefully prioritizing it for the AE. When I was at Box, one of the things we did was we did this thing called the brain. And the goal of the brain was deliver up to the AE those things they should focus first on at the beginning of their day, because they are the hottest based on all of the signals that we've gotten. So I see that evolving to be more and more like high productivity, right? Just think if we're going to actually direct an AE, if they're looking from their cockpit, it'll say, these are the top 5 things you need to do based on all of the signals that we're getting. Second, it's really, one of the greatest things that it's doing is just revolutioning the way that we talk to each other in a sales cycle. I think the worst thing that a customer has to endure is the repeated, I talked to the SDR, that person qualified me. Now I'm talking to the AE. I'm having the same conversation over again. We should walk into those conversations and I think this is what value selling is with a point of view. And our discovery is really in validating that point of view. Well, with AI, that point of view is a lot easier to get to. When I was at Box, we had these outbound SDRs, sales development reps, who were phenomenal at doing all the research. In fact, we started to hire history majors because they knew how to do all that research and bring it together. AI is doing that now. But it doesn't excuse you from having a point of view. You use that data to come up with a point of view, and you walk into the conversation with, here's what I've learned about your business. This is where I think we can be of help. And then you're having a conversation about their business now, not about our product anyway. So that's the second one. And then the third is it's really enabling us to scale without losing the personal touch, scale how we do what we do. And that would really be around things like, Gong. Gong is a tool that can help you with real data, tell your AEs, talk to and coach your AEs about the things they do really well and the things they need to work on, and enables you to actually create a development plan on a skills and competencies plan by looking at the data. And not just, and the way we can look at the data just gets more and more powerful. What that also offers in the background secret, which is all of the leaders with a Gong actually know exactly what's going on and are people doing what they need to be doing to be successful. So but those are 3 examples. I think the thing that I believe in is that these things will augment and make us more productive and will make us better at what we do. I am not a big believer in replacing the function entirely. I think the value of a sales development rep is they do pull out if they're good, they pull out those key points and they accelerate the cycle by the very fact that they figured out what is the personal motivator for this person, and where does this project stack up against all the other projects? It's going to be very hard to do that with AI at this point.
Mm. For sure. I wonder, though I have like 5 other questions, but I will save. But I wonder, like, for another big sector is like, a lot of our listeners are working in venture capital, and then they are technically selling their funds to the LPs, right? So, and then the fund is like not very differentiated because everybody's targeting the same group of companies, and then not everybody, but like I would say the majority people are targeting, let's say, AI, B2B software, like AI agent, infrastructure, dev tools, right? Like, so that's like the half of the Silicon Valley seed funds. So, like, how do you target the LPs? And your audience are also like your customer are also potentially the startups, right? Let's say they want to invest in the next generation of gym or next generation of segment. Like, how do you kind of like, in terms of sales, like how do you sell to these two different type of audience? One part is LPs. When they see a deck, they're like, I've seen this 5 times. Like, everybody come from everybody have a really amazing network.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think some of these are kind of fundamental. You have to be able to speak to why somebody would change what they're doing today to take on what you're recommending. At least this is my point of view. And it's not like I'm sitting doing this VC thing, but, and I think the challenge today is how differentiated and how broadly applicable is that capability that you're talking about. And I think about like the Clarys of the world and the Gongs of the world and the Outreaches of the world, who are all kind of consolidating or kind of coming in at the same problem with it from a different perspective. And at some point it's going to be like, which one of these is the one? And it's going to be about like, how is this solution highly differentiated from the next one? And I think right now with, the agentic, the agentic era that we're in is, are agents going to be capabilities or are they going to be companies? And I think that's the question that I continue to ponder. The capabilities of these like co-pilots that kind of sit on your side in sales are huge. Like the ability to actually gather more information because of AI from a chat talk so that we actually put it in front of an SDR or even coach the SDR as they're having that conversation is huge. But is it its own product? I don't know. Like its own company. I think what makes this really, really interesting is that it's about data, and the Salesforces of the world and the Microsofts of the world, they have huge, vast amounts of data. So this innovation cycle, to my mind, is wildly different than some of the other ones, where the incumbent, in some cases, is in a better position because they have the data and they have the context. So I think it's a really interesting question, Grace, and I'm skirting an answer because I don't know if there is an answer right now. I think we're going to find out here in the next little while as companies achieve, again, I'll go back to what is the defensible business benefit they are seeing from these AI, the generative AI things that they're doing. I'll say, I do think what is really interesting is the verticalization play in like the legal industry and the ability to sort of really accelerate that in an industry that is not known for being technologically ahead, innovative, right? It really is. There's lots of data there, and there's lots that they can learn from that data that they can use in further cases, right? So I think that verticalization is probably where I'm seeing the most. If you were to ask me if I were going to place a bet, like, do you have a unique differentiator in a particular industry use case or use cases that accelerate or reduce the cost of resources or reduce the risk in a legal situation? Does that give you anything?
For sure. Yeah. I feel like, I think you also talk a lot about like, data and I guess like I don't want to waste too much of your time, but like maybe we just like have one small piggyback question and then 1 minute fire round. So in terms of data, like for as a sales leader, what are data that's important to you?
Oof. What data is important to me?
Yeah.
So, if you're doing things like pipeline development, activity data is important, but it's not activity data to see that people did the thing. It's to actually track the conversion of those activities. Are we actually getting conversion? So it's very important for me to see from the top, when we have the marketing piece, how does that convert when it gets to the sales piece? And then how does that convert through a sales process? And like, how are we doing on those, that creating that flow and that conversion? So it's really about those conversion rates. For an AE, there's a thing called the velocity formula. Essentially, it is your recipe for how you're going to be successful as a sales rep. And it's really about like, how many opportunities do you need? And what's the ACV of those opportunities? And how long is your sales cycle? These are really basic things, but I believe every salesperson should know that about themselves. Like, what is my formula? And that is the tool that they come to a meeting with their manager to try to figure out, how do I get better? Obviously, there's a reason I like MedPick, is because it actually helps me understand where we are in a deal. And then, sales stages, not to make a plug for Clary, but Clary was the first one who really made this real and brought it to life for the managers, so that you weren't drilling or asking questions that already exist. You could bring the information forward in a conversation and say, hey, Jim, I understand that you're this far. It sounds like you're getting stuck getting to the economic buyer. Let's have a conversation about how do we get to the economic buyer? Because I could see that in the system, and I could get there before I got to a forecast. So that's, surfacing those key indicators for revenue as a CRO, those things that I'm going to care about, that I need to surface the executives, those top deals. Is there a chain? And now I'm going to flip completely. Like, if you have create and close, which is business that comes in in the quarter and is converted in the quarter, are we seeing any trends that would indicate better than past or worse? And then can we activate something inside of that from a marketing perspective to move that back up? So it's really the visibility that I can take action on, that I'm looking for, against all those things I talked about at the very beginning, like the people, the processes work. Are we getting the pipeline we need? Is the rigor in place to make sure that we're actually progressing these deals? Is our revenue progressing the way we need it in order to make our goals for the quarter? And then, are we doing a good job with the customers such that our retention numbers are going to be where we want them to be? And can we increase the lifetime value of those customers?
Wow. Okay, so I took a lot of notes on this, but
Good.
okay, so we'll dive into the quick fire round. What's your favorite book?
Okay, go for it.
Favorite book?
Favorite book? Good to Great.
Who made the biggest impact in your career?
Mark Burton.
Who would you invite to your dinner party?
John Wooden.
Where can we find you outside of work?
Running, or on a horse, or at the beach.
Okay, who is the dinner party guest? Like, who is John?
John Wooden, the wooden pyramid.
I want to say
I'm a UCLA alum. You have to like basketball.
Yeah. Oh my God. You're so good at like fire rounds. So like literally everybody else were saying 5 things or like 2 sentences to explain each answer, and then you're like,
I could go on. John McMahon's book is like, I have 2 sons that have just entered technology. I've told them they have to fight the something sales manager, the qualified sales manager.
Yeah. I've been listening to it. He was our guest on Tuesday.
I know. So I did that. Predictable Revenue by Mark Roberge is another really good one.
Oh, another guest. So so love that. Okay.
Yeah, I'm a disciple.
Wait, so you have 2 so I also listened to this. You have 2 sons like in New York. They're like doing sales. Okay. Besides these 2 sales information diet, like what are things that you would tell them to, like, how to be a great sales leader?
A great sales leader?
Yeah. Or are they just trying to be a great salesperson right now?
Right now they're trying to be, but actually, it's funny. This was one of the things that you kind of just teed up for me. And I was like, you have to be, there is one thing that you have to be in both of those situations. Like, there's a couple things between, let's say, a CRO and an SDR. Okay.
Yeah. What makes a good like CRO? We didn't get to that, but like I'm like, because like not everybody can be a CRO. Like a lot of people are solo great sales guy or gal, but like
yeah. So I mean, this is for me is a really important question, because if I was going to go work, I wanted to be intellectually stimulated. And the best thing that's happened to me is that they come and ask me questions now, and I actually can answer them. If whether they're right, well, is to be determined. But I think the thing for me when I was an SDR, why I did it and why it was interesting to me is because I was super curious about business. So you have to be really curious about how business works, like in order to do this job, to be in sales. And you have to have this sort of persistence built in. You're just going to keep trying. And then finally, it's is the person willing to take risks? Are they willing to try things? And finally, coachable. That's so obvious. That by the way is the exact same thing that you need in a CRO. In your and the job for both is to identify future opportunity for the business, which is growth. So if you think about what you have to do as a CRO, your job is to build enduring revenue growth for the company that you're in so that it's a durable company by focusing on the talent you bring into the organization, how robust the pipeline is, how many people are we building market share? That's always how are we doing that all the time? And are we delivering business outcomes to the customers we serve? And that's really where that telescope, wide angle, and microscope comes in. You constantly have to be thinking about that. That is the same thing, by the way, if a SDR is doing their job right in that whole qualification, is they're thinking about what's the current state and the problem with it, what is the pain that's being associated with it, and the future state that they could achieve. The CRO has to do the same thing when they come into a business. What's the current state? Are we deaccelerating and we need to reaccelerate? And what are the capabilities I need to bring into the business, enable them to achieve their future state of being $1 billion company?
I feel what's so mind blown about our conversation is so different from the startup world. I was chatting with another founder. So basically he was telling me investor buy into vibe checks. So basically they just oh, do you look like you will create $1 billion company? Well, I'm speaking to a lot of early stage founders. I'm
how do I get to 10 million? It's the same thing, by the way. Do I understand
really?
what? Oh yeah. If I have in the first, if I'm trying to get the first 15 customers, I have to understand why would they change the way they're working today? Why would they change it? First of all, because something's really bad in their business that it's so bad that they have to fix it. Secondly, why am I uniquely capable of solving that problem for them in a way that nobody else is? And I think this is the thing about CEOs is they have just such conviction about that. Well, not only am I going to solve it today and life is going to be better, I'm going to solve it for the next 5 years and it's going to be even better and it will completely transform the way you work. If you look at, some of these companies, and I always use Aaron as this. He's this wonderful thing where he'd paint the picture of the future and he'd go tell that picture to the CEOs and they'd be like, okay, go implement that. And then as a sales team, we'd be like, it's not there yet. This is where we are, but this is where we're going. And his ability to focus on here we are and here's the steps to the future was amazing. Now we always had there was always tension in that, but if you don't know kind of the future state, for them it was it wasn't just data storage, right? Content. It was about the workflows around that content and how that can materially change how companies operate and how they collaborate better together. That was the big future state when these companies were initially founded. And he was looking at it because he was like, I can't even share my movies with my friends. What would it be like in a world where I could do that to thousands of people? And that was where he was going. So, and then those first 10 customers, it's how much consistency is there between those first 10 customers that I can carry forward as our foundational pieces of capability that we deliver. Build on that, right? That's your core, and then you build on your core. And I think that takes a unique human being to be able to see that. I can't see that in many cases, but I can certainly operationalize it.
Wow. Okay. So Paul have a question maybe, and then we'll wrap up. I'm so sorry. We went over so long.
It's been fun, Grace.
Didn't type this fast enough, but are sales teams building a standardized prompt kits for their AEs? I guess.
Yeah, actually there's a company called Seller. This is early stage, which is actually doing that around the value driver framework and this MedPick piece that actually, and you can see it even if you go on ChatGPT and say, write an email that is MedPick oriented, you can do that. So yes, and they're starting to embed those things into the process of how an SDR works. I think that was the question.
Mm-hmm.
Seller is more like, I would say that at this stage, they're much more capability oriented versus the whole customer journey oriented.
Mm-hmm.
Is that, I think I answered the question. I'm not sure. Is that sort of what the question was?
Yeah. So I think it's yes. Hi, Paul. It's yes. But anyway, Lesley, thank you so much for coming to the show. You're so knowledgeable. And yeah, oh my
Thank you,
God.
Grace. Thanks for having me. It was great. It's really fun. Take
Okay.
care.
Let me quickly answer.